Welcome to the Civic Works Committee meeting of May 24th, 2017. I'm going to call the meeting to order and look to my colleagues for any disclosures of pecuniary interest. I see none, and I'll point out that Councillor Ridley sends her regrets. And I'll now ask the committee if there's any items they'd like to pull. I've had a request for number 6, which is the Talbot Street underpass. Councillor Armstrong. Let's also call 5 and 7. And if there's no further requests, then I'll look for a motion for 2, 3, 4, 8, 9, and 10.
The rest.
Okay, thank you. We have some troubles with signing in on our new system, so
I'm boycotting the computers today.
we've got a boycott.
Really make them simple enough that they make sense. I'm not using them.
Okay, so we may have some manual voting today. Okay. But I don't see it.
Politics.
Oh, exactly.
Well, they make it simple enough for participants.
Okay, in the meantime, I'm going to go to Councillor Usher.
I just want to ask a quick question on item number 1, and I don't know if Ms. Chair will be able to answer it, but item number 1 is to do with the water, Elgin and Huron and London. So London, because it's providing this only because it's the administrative municipality, am I right?
Through the chair, this is actually the agreement with the people we co-tenant with, the 2 other municipalities in this space to continue to contract. So this is on behalf of the City of London, not on behalf of the water boards, to continue to contract Aqua to manage the pumping assets that serve those 3 communities for us.
And I agree with that, but what I'm trying to get at is that we are doing this because we are the administrative municipality. We are not doing this for London portion. We're doing it for the whole, but only because we're the administrative municipality, right?
No, through the chair, this actually is because we are the City of London. This is the infrastructure that serves us as London and our distribution system.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay, so
We still seem to have, I've gotten
you've got nothing.
no display. And so we'll do this manually then. Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. On item 8 and 9, I certainly support the recommendations. In item number 8, there's some commentary about how the Thames Valley Parkway North Branch may be impacted by the reallocations that are going on to cover the Kiwanis Park Pathway budget. And I think we need to be aware of that as we're thinking about it. We're talking about that being under construction next year, but as the report points out, that might not be happening. We have a significant budget shortfall. That's an important part of the Thames Valley Parkway. And I just wanted to see, I saw that in the report. I appreciate getting the bad news early, that we have a bit of a budget problem there. And certainly we need to turn our minds to how we're going to make that project happen.
Thank you. So I have a motion then for 2 to 4 and 8 to 10, moved by Councillor Armstrong, seconded by Deputy Mayor Hubert. And let's call the question.
I vote yay.
Okay. I'll do it on here and then see who can do it. Whoops. Closing the vote, motion pass.
4-0.
All right, thank you. So let's go to item number 5 in the agenda, the staff report on the international water industry position statement on non-flushable and flushable labeled products, pulled by Councillor Armstrong.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I'm sure this will be a very brief meeting. But I did want to ask through you to staff. I'm certainly in support of the recommendation. I believe we're contributing $1,000, and I'm good with that. I think we need to be part of these initiatives or any initiatives like this. But I did want to ask, can you give me an overview what we're doing on a local level all the time I know we have our initiative to eliminate oils and greases in our water system by giving out containers, recyclable containers, biodegradable containers that people can use. And sort of want to hear how that's going. I know at certain events I've taken some with me and given them out, and they're well received. So I think that's a good program as far as the city's concerned. But what other initiatives do we have going to divert things that we don't want in our water system? And do we have literature available? What's online? Just a 5-minute commentary. I'd like to sort of an overview how we're doing in that area.
Speaking through the chair, we have an ongoing public outreach campaign that covers the grease cups, and to date they've been very well received. We're continually restocking and issuing those out. We have a number of areas that receive more rags or more debris, especially related to pumping stations. And when we have a particularly bad area, we will go out and do a letter drop in the mailboxes and just notify the area residents to bring that to their, make them aware of that. There is a number of items available on the city website related to the fog and the rags and the debris, and keeping people up to speed on those initiatives. There are a couple of YouTube videos on the website as well that were very well done and have been well received, covering a number of things that shouldn't be in the collection system. So it is an ongoing effort. London has been probably at the forefront of it for a number of years. We've been very active in it, and this campaign is just the next step in trying to get a handle on it.
Just on a follow-up, and I remember seeing in the media concerns raised about plastics, and there's a word for them, plastics that you really can't hardly see, and they end up in the Great Lakes. I guess the plastics break down, and they're causing a big concern. Are we sort of involved in that initiatives? Maybe it's covered under this, but are we involved in educating the public locally on plastics in the Great Lakes and where they're coming from, and we shouldn't be contributing to it? Or do we catch in our system all plastics so they're not getting through to the river and out to the lake?
Speaking through the chair, we can't remove all the plastics. We do remove the larger material that comes in, and but the microplastics are another issue that typically will go straight through a plant. They're that small, and hydraulically we can't capture them. The biggest issue with those is they're sold in the supermarkets, and we don't have at this time the ability to take them off the shelves. And that really needs to be a national awareness campaign or some kind of standards developed for those products. But at this point, don't believe that we're that active in trying to take those items off the shelves.
Oh, thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, You mentioned a national, this has to be dealt with nationally. Do you know if there is any national initiatives? And if not, is this something that perhaps we should be sending a letter through to the federal government? I guess it would be Ministry of Natural Resources or whatever the case may be, letting them know that, we hope they'll do more, or are they doing enough? Do you have much understanding of what their initiatives they have going right now so that we could sort of see if it's something that we should promote maybe through FCM?
Certainly, I think there's an interest through the chair in looking at a ban on these being in products because they're typically sold to consumers without them understanding the impacts they have. Microplastics were actually listed as a toxic substance last summer, and that's intended to be en route towards a ban, which we understand there is legislation being contemplated. Certainly, reinforcing that that's important to London is not a bad thing to do. I know RIPCO, the Public Works Commissioners in Ontario, have also had this discussion and have provided some correspondence in the past. So, thank you.
Thank you. In these often 200-page reports, there's not often a lot that's entertaining, but in this particular one, the International Water Services Flushability Group has launched an initiative called the Washing Initiative to Protect Our Environment with the acronym WIPE. So it's fun to see a little irony in the report today. While contemplating that, I'll look to my colleagues for a mover and a seconder, unless there's any more comments. Oh, yes. Councillor Usher.
This is one of the reasons I'm here. In fact, it's the most specific reason why I'm here. And I want to boast about this a little bit because I want to boost it also. Because I've been not involved, but I've been approached on this about 2 or 3 years ago. And I took this to FCM and we talked about it. And I know that my colleague is asking if we're going to deal with the government, but somewhere in this report it talks about 2 ministries that we want to take this forward with. That's why they need the $150,000. I think it's a very, very important thing. It may be a simple thing, but there's a nice video, and Brian Orr showed it to me some time ago, just before I addressed it at FCM, and it showed the exact thing that is happening to the pumps and our sewer system because of us flushing things that are not flushable. And the problem about this is that we need to educate people a little bit more. So I think the question of what we're doing out there to let people be aware of this is important, because a simple thing like Kleenex or the tissue paper that we have in our kitchen, it damages the whole system. And that's part of this $250 million that causes that problem, including all these swipes and diapers and other things that people flush down the toilet. So I think it's an educational thing more than anything else, but we got to reduce it. And I think it's time that these two organizations take the bull by the horn and start spreading the word on our behalf, on all municipalities' behalf. So I'm fully in support of this, and I think that this is something that we as city councillors and as staff need to be very, very conscious of. Thank you. I just wanted to say that.
Thank you, Councillor Usher. Councillor Hummer.
Seems like a good time to give kudos to Barry Orr for the work he did on TVO. This is back in March, and they had a whole segment about, don't flush these things down the toilet, and I thought he did a great job. He's a guy who's got a lot of expertise in that area. He's really passionate about it. I thought he did a good job representing the City of London and communicating province-wide to people about this issue, which obviously affects other municipalities as well. He did a good job.
Thank you. Any more comments from our committee?
I'd just say one thing, just any increase in particular matter costs the taxpayers of London more money at the processing plant. And I remember a very informative report that then got a lot of attention and created a lot of controversy in the community was the potential ban of carburetors, which I'm well aware of are being installed in high-end homes on a regular basis. in the City of London, and that's a conversation for another day. But we did have an extensive conversation. I got to tell you, I think I was chair of ETC at that time, and I got pounded by the carburetor industry on it. But it doesn't help us very much at the waste treatment facility. So,
Councillor Armstrong.
Well, I'm glad the councillor, deputy mayor, has raised that issue, and it's an important issue, and maybe, I don't know how we would feel about this, but maybe we should be putting that on an agenda for another day. And
2019.
2019. No, I think it should be put on an agenda. We should resurrect that old report and maybe have a conversation about it. It'd only be doing the right thing. I think our community, the whole country for that matter, understands the importance of water quality, the drinkable, making sure our water is drinkable and safe. And I think having heard the information about, unwanted plastics, I think we should at least put that on the agenda so we can be aware of whether or not we could take some action in that area. And I know that this would be Councillor Hubert's agenda again, but hopefully it wouldn't take a pounding if we just have a discussion to see if, somehow there's something that we can do. And maybe technology's changed too. So I don't know how we would feel about a motion, or can we just put that on the agenda for resurrect that report and have it back on an agenda so we can have a look at it?
Sure. Well, I think that any time a councillor can add something to the agenda, so just request the committee look at that.
Okay. You need a motion?
Well, here's what I would suggest, if I could, Mr. Chair, is where the gap is, it's people out of sight, out of mind. I did read about the 3 Ps in the report, which I won't go into, but out of sight, out of mind. And basically what goes down a drain or goes down the toilet is out of sight. And where the problem is, and I think they're trying to deal with this, is there's no direct connection in terms of what goes down a drain or into the sewage system and the cost of processing it and the environmental impact of it. So it's sort of there's a triangle there, and basically in the consumer's mind, once it goes down the drain, they don't associate the other 2 parts of it. And I think the issue is, I do not want to get into a banning discussion around that, but the fact that home builders in the City of London are putting that into high-end homes tells me that there's a conceptual gap in their understanding between the costs, and they're one of the groups that hammers on us a lot for keeping our costs down, and how they're implementing a house. Or how they're constructing a house. And so I think the motion that I would put forward connected to this would be that our civic administration brings back and I know we do public information, but it's not getting through that. I've never seen on the banner over Wellington Road, what should go down your toilet, 3 Ps, that's just not there. But every kid would think it's hilarious if you had it there. And then they go, Mom, what does that mean? Right? And I know when I speak to student groups at schools, I said, where the City of London's work starts? When you get up in the morning and you go to the toilet. And we talk about that. But I think there's that connection. So my motion would be the civic administration look at how we communicate around all sorts of particular matter that might go into our waste treatment system.
Okay, so it looks like we have a mover and a seconder for that motion. Should this be added to this? Or do we want to?
I can update.
Councillor Usher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I beg you to not dilute this purpose. I beg you to separate these two things. And the reason I say this is because this is not the first time this thing has come in front of council. This is the third time that I could remember. And it has gone out to the school children because last year, for example, I was out at something called Water Day at Pioneer Village. And the group was out there explaining to the kids what happened. And this was focused specifically on flushability and what should go into that toilet, what should be put in there because of what it does to the system. It's not the environmental aspect of it. It's the process, the mechanics that is damages that causes the $250,000. So what I'm trying to get at is that I don't want this, I'm hoping that you don't allow this to get lost into something else, because what you're coming up with is bigger. But this is important. That's all I'm asking you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Hubert.
So my motion would be this would be a part A, and then my motion would be a part B. They're two separate things. This needs to go forward, no problem with that. And then there's something subsequent that can go on future work plan. Okay.
So, Councillor Usher, it looks like we'll include these as separate items on the one motion.
Okay.
It is unfortunate that our pipes and our treatment facility does get clogged by these things. Otherwise, we could put carburetors in every home and simply stop the garbage pickup at all. You just put everything down the sink. All right. So having filled a little time with sound, it looks like we have a motion here. It's been moved and seconded. Any further comments on this? The Part B saying that Civic Administration be requested to review and report back with respect to how we educate and communicate the issue regarding what goes into the waste treatment plants. And so, seeing no comments, I'll call the question on that.
Opening the vote? Closing the vote, motion passed, 4-0.
And so, once again, education comes up as an important item. And in the fall, I know I will have a motion coming to the council to talk about that. But now we're moving on to item number 6, which is the Talbot Street underpass. So I'll go to Councillor Squire.
Thank you very much, through you, Mr. Chair. I must admit that I enjoyed this report. Having lived in London my entire life, I know how many, I know this underpass like the back of my hand, and I was actually involved in a move once where we rented a van and were very happy, went down Talbot Street and got stuck under the underpass. So I'm very familiar with this. And, you know, I think you can put up as many signs as you want, but, you know, as my wife says, she's trained me very well, but I will still do stupid things. So I really think that we're doing the best we can. And I think the other important aspect is, and one of the important things that came out of the rapid transit was, we're going to work on Adelaide Street, and we move that forward. We're going to continue to look at things on Richmond Street. And I know people in Ward 6, the reason they go under there is because they're trying to avoid trains. And if they are come down, and I've done it many times myself, if I'm coming down Colburn and there's a train, I will go up Oxford and try to make that left turn onto Talbot Street. So I think if we do work in other areas, we're going to get people to avoid this. And I think there's higher priorities. Cars can still go under it. So I think we're in good shape. If we can do additional signage, fine, but I think there's other priorities.
Deputy Mayor Hubert.
I've actually renamed this. I appreciate Councillor Squire's transparency on his transgressions with moving trucks, but I've renamed this the Can Opener as a bridge name. So this is our local can opener. I do have a question about the signs. While there's advanced signs, I know in some places I've seen almost like a crossbar that's in advance of the underpass. So it's kind of like if you ring the bell, it's probably time to stop. And I don't know if there's any of that sort of application, you know, that I've seen it in other places. I don't know if that has any applicability, or if I can't tell from the picture on my report whether that's what's being suggested there. I mean, we've got it all over the place. And you know where the problem actually lies? A lot of times it's people using MapQuest. And, you know, and I thank them for that because if it wasn't for two guys using MapQuest, we still would have a one-way bridge on Sarnia Road. And it was the wedging of two trucks by virtue of construction vehicles that actually led CP to wake up and consent to moving that. So is there any signage thing that we can do that way that's kind of unique, that it would be over the roadway?
Thank you through the chair to the deputy mayor. That is actually what we're proposing. And option number 3 in potential mitigating measures, we're looking at putting some advanced overhead signage, which if the truck goes and hits it, it'll know it's going to hit the bridge as well. And we have a similar installation currently on Eleanor Street at Florence, near the old Kellogg's plant, which prohibits trucks from going down there. So we're looking at a similar installation here. It is, again, something that will provide for some advance notice for trucks, but end of the day really is up to the driver of the trucks to understand the height of their vehicle. Hopefully this doesn't cause other issues, because if someone hits this sign, it could potentially knock the sign down. So we're hoping to have the sign at a height that it would hit the sign and kind of swing. You'd know that it's there. So that's really the best we can do with signage. We have signed this area significantly, and I think that's our last measure that we can potentially do in this area.
Thank you. Councillor Armstrong.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and certainly this has been an issue that's been ongoing now for many, many years, and certainly anything we can do to prevent these collisions obviously would make a lot of sense. I noticed in the report they talked about, you know, raising the height of the railway to provide significant clearance. Well, I'm getting more educated on the railway issue, and I don't think this can be raised because it's raising the track. So again, this is one of many issues to do with the CP track. In order to finally and forever solve this problem, it's going to take some engineering. It's going to take some serious money. And I think the only way you can deal with this is probably going lower, not higher. Having said that, so there's a big cost, and it'd be millions of dollars to deal with this issue. Then we've got the Adelaide Street overpass, multiple millions of dollars, and that's sort of in the works. Then, of course, you know, we have the general issue of, you know, Richmond Street being blocked and other streets. And I guess the thing is, this all goes back to CP operating on that track in London. And if they weren't operating on that track, I believe all these issues, these multiple millions of dollars that will have to be spent now and in the future, would disappear. And so again, I want to bring that to the committee's attention. We really need to work hard on looking at whether or not CP Rail could operate on CN track, and whether or not between the city, the province, the federal government, we can make that happen, and with the cooperation of CN and CP. So, and I guess the question comes to mind, you know, is there public support for this? How much public support would there be to have something like this happen? I can only tell you this morning as an example. I'm at a place where I'm getting a tire fixed, and a gentleman walks up to me and says, you know something? I really support that idea about CP operating on CN tracks, and I won't take up more time than that. And I want to point out, I don't know this gentleman. He knew who I was, and he stops me to say, I really support that idea. I can only tell you, not too long ago, I'm in an elevator in City Hall, and I had somebody else come up to me in the funeral business and said, you know, same thing. I really think that's a great idea. So that's very unusual, I can tell you, for me to have people I don't know, not even my constituents, come up and say, hey, we think that's a good idea, it needs to happen. And so I'm telling you this story because I honestly believe there's huge public support out there, grassroots support for us to do something. And I realize it would take a lot of money and a lot of work, and council has given the mayor direction to look into it. But I really think this is not one of those things that we should forget. And there's so many opportunities, that track not being used for freight. I've mentioned, I mean, that would give you an east-west bicycle corridor right across the city. And I don't know, having that corridor, what kind of bigger effect that would have on all our bicycle plans, but it could have a big impact. So I just want you to think outside the box on this one, and I hope my council colleagues will keep that in mind. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Councillor Squire.
You know, when we went through the through you, Mr. Chair, when we went through the rapid transit debate, I know every councillor got hundreds of emails from people saying, why don't you just move the tracks? Why don't you just twin the tracks? This is not new. This is not some light bulb that went off in one person's head and said, oh my goodness, here's something we can do. So I understand what Councillor Armstrong's saying. I'm gratified that people are coming up to him and complimenting him. That's great. I think that happens hopefully to all of us, at least at one point during our term. But look, we got to put this thing to bed. I mean, we've got to either say we can do it or it's a no-go, because, you know, people are talking about it, and Councillor Armstrong's talking about it. So I know that, you know, Mr. Soldo has said many times that it would be, that it's not something that is realistic. So we need to know that somebody at some point has to stand up and say, we cannot do this. Because if we spend, you know, the next 8 years talking about it, and we're not doing the other things that we can do, which is the Adelaide underpass, looking at Richmond, then we're going to be in the same spot in 8 years, and people are going to be standing up at a meeting going, why don't you move the tracks? So when do we get the definitive stamp it, we've tried it, we've talked to them, it's not going to happen, or has that already happened? I mean, we're going in circles here. We keep having the same idea coming back again. And I'd like to know at some point, who's going to make that announcement that it's a no-go, or that it's possible. I need to know that.
Through the chair, we certainly did receive some direction from council through the BRT debate about pursuing this option. So we're just starting that work right now. It'll be concurrent, though, to the other work. So we're not going to put Adelaide on hold while we have those conversations. My expectation is that those conversations can start with CP and CN and federal officials anytime now. So the intent is just to get our team together and move it forward. As to when we would have a definitive answer from them, it does depend on how the conversations go. We've to date not heard, you know, that they were particularly interested in those solutions, but it doesn't hurt to ask again, as long as we're not putting things that are also important on hold.
Through you, Mr. Chair, then that's great. Then for me, I know exactly where we are right now, that our staff is going to have a chat with them about it. So hopefully councilors will stop, at least until we get some kind of answer, we'll stop making speeches about it. Because we're not stupid. We all know that if it could happen, we'd love to see it happen. But it's not one person's idea. I mean, if 100 people came up with this idea, 10,000 came up with it during the rapid transit debate. So let's either find out it's possible, what the number is, or not. And I commend you for that. That's all I'm asking. But the circular, let's get it done, it would solve all of London's problems, I don't think is helpful.
Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I'm thinking, and I won't mention any names, but I don't think I have a light bulb over my head. And certainly the discussion about CP and CN has happened way back in the past. And because of the the BRT project, this is something that needed to be revisited. And we are going to revisit it. So it's not something that, from my understanding, and I have talked with, I will disclose CP and CN about this issue, and I'll leave it at that. So when I speak from information that I've gotten from them. And I believe, based on that information, that this is something doable from a technical point of view. But maybe there's a business side to it, that there is some, one side or the other may not have in the past seen the financial benefit. It may take the federal government intervening and mandating that they come up with a plan in order to solve a problem. This municipality shouldn't be spending multiple millions of dollars, tens and tens of millions of dollars, in order to allow a business to run a train, multiple trains daily through our city at the taxpayers' expense, because it's a way of us subsidizing them. And if there's a better way that's not going to inconvenience our community, disrupt our community, cost us millions of dollars, and never mind the environmental impact of holding up thousands of vehicles every day, polluting our community, causing unnecessary noise, etc. I really think, and when I hear from the public, that they like this idea, that this makes sense. When the average person says this makes a lot of sense, then we are obligated to move ahead and pursue it to the end. And sometimes when people don't want to cooperate, government needs to step in and tell them that, look, it's in the greater good of everybody involved, that you need to work something out. And I think it's a lot to do with their operations and the bottom line. Well, the bottom line is our community needs to see something happen. It's time. We've talked about it, true enough. This isn't one person's idea that just came up now. It's an idea that's been talked about for many, many years. But now, as they say, the rubber hits the road. It's time that we saw some action. We saw everybody come to the table, and we saw some serious cooperation. Some serious cooperation, especially from CN and CP. They need to work together. They work together in other communities. Sudbury, they both use the same track up there and the same track back. Why can't we do that here? So that's all. I just wanted to make sure that everybody understands, not my stroke of genius, but rather a common sense solution to a big problem in our community.
Thank you, Councillor Armstrong, and perhaps I'd ask you to second this, the motion on the floor, and we can move on. Councillor Helmer.
Just returning briefly to the Talbot Street underpass. I'm glad to see, first of all, that the number of collisions is not that high. I think every one of them gets reported in the media, so it seems like there's a very large number of them, but I'm talking about 5 in a year. I mean, I'd like to avoid them all, but that's not that bad. But I am worried about the damage to the structure itself from the trucks hitting it repeatedly, and I just wonder to what extent that's actually a concern years and years and years of these impacts and what kind of damage that's doing to the structure and its longevity.
Thank you through the chair, through the councillor. The trucks are actually not hitting the bridge. They're hitting a protective beam that's been placed there many years ago to protect the bridge solely for this purpose. So if you were looking at the structure from on top, there's two steel beams on either side, and they're hitting the steel beams first, and that's where the can opener effect is actually occurring.
Certainly, I understand that they hit the beams, and I imagine they're there to prevent it from damaging the structure, but that's actually working. It's like we're not seeing degradation of the structure, even with like the beam is doing its job.
Through the chair to the councillor, the bridge actually is inspected by CP, and if there was any issues, they would be obligated to deal with them.
Thank you. And maybe just a question from the chair to staff. Last week, we decided that although we weren't going to build a tunnel, it was certainly a very doable thing from an engineering standpoint. However, in this underpass, it was suggested that bringing it lower would be difficult, and perhaps you could describe why that was the case for the people who may be wondering.
Thank you to the chair. The underpass right now has a clearance of about 3.3 meters. You want to get to about 5 meters for any new structures. So to think about dropping the roadway at 1.7 meters. It's basically my height. That's quite significant in terms of dropping the road. And then you have Oxford Street, which is directly north of this underpass. You would create such a issue related to the angle of the roadway itself. Going up to Oxford, you'd have to drop Oxford itself down to come up with an acceptable grade at that location. There are a significant amount of utilities underneath, including one of the main hydro lines through the city that goes through this area itself. There's a substation to the south of this area. So you can engineer a solution for anything. But it would be quite significant here, moving all the utilities, coming up with a place to drain that underpass, dealing with Oxford Street. If you're going to do all of that, you'd want to widen the bridge because it is at a skew and make it bigger as well. So it is a significant financial endeavor to move forward on this.
Thank you. And any further comments? One more from Councillor Armstrong.
Briefly, it's pretty obvious from an engineering point of view. The track can't go up. The tunnel would be very expensive, or underpass can't go down. That would be very expensive. There's really no solution to this problem other than warning trucks that don't go through there. There'll be an accident, and so that's unfortunate. No solution to the problem other than education, and obviously once in a while that's not working. So again, this is one of those things, if we want to permanently solve the problem, we have to look for a different solution. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Okay, let's call the question.
Opening the vote. Closing the vote. Motion passed 4-0.
That takes us to item number 7. Councillor Armstrong, you pulled this.
I think I'll pass on that one. I think
I'll move it.
Good with it.
Okay, I have a mover and looking for a seconder. Councillor Armstrong, would you second that? Let's call the question.
Opening the vote. Closing the vote. Motion passed 4-0.
Thank you. That brings us to the end of our consent items. There's no scheduled items nor items for direction. We do have deferred matters in the form of our deferred matters list. So I'll look to see if anyone wanted to speak to one of the matters on that list. I see some shaking heads. So that brings us to the end of our meeting, unless there's any additional business, is there?
We have to receive that.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, there's, on, on the added agenda was a communication from Councillor Ridley. So if we could receive items 11 and 12, can we do those together?
We'll do each one separately. I'll just.
We'll do them separately. So when those come up, I'll look to those of you who've got your system running to move and second those. Okay. So our deferred matters list is there.
And number
Moved
12.
by Councillor Armstrong, seconded by Deputy Mayor Hubert. Okay, let's call that question.
Open the vote.
I'm sorry, we've got one more item, it's the receiving communication. Oh, we did put those together. Okay, well, thank you very much. So I will accept that motion for adjournment. Looking for a seconder, oh, there it is, Councillor Squire, yes, thank you, all in favor? Thank you very much, have a great afternoon.